My son called me at 11:47 on a Wednesday night. I know the exact time because I'd just finished watching the late news and was about to turn off the lamp in the living room. He never calls that late. In 31 years, the boy has never called me after 9. I picked up on the second ring. Dad. His voice was low, the way it gets when he's at work and can't speak freely. Is my sister's husband home right now? I looked down the hallway. The light under the guest bedroom door was on. Yes, why? Go to your bedroom. Close the door. Don't tell him you're talking to me. What's going on? Dad, please, just do it. I walked slowly down the hall, past the framed photos of the kids when they were small, past the coat hooks where my son-in-law's jacket hung like it belonged there. I closed my bedroom door and sat on the edge of the bed. The same bed I'd slept in for 26 years with my wife before she passed. Okay, I said. I'm alone. My son took a breath. I need you to listen to me without asking questions until I'm done. Can you do that? Yes. We've been looking at him for 4 months. His company isn't a company, Dad. It's a front. He's been running a mortgage fraud scheme across Ontario and BC. Fake property assessments, forged signatures, shell corporations. We're talking about millions of dollars and at least a dozen families who lost their homes. The room felt very still. And your sister, I said. We don't know yet. Her name isn't on anything. But she's been living off his money, signing documents he put in front of her. We don't know what she knew. I sat there in the dark bedroom with the phone pressed to my ear and thought about my daughter. About the woman she'd become in the years since she met him. How she'd slowly stopped calling as much. How she'd started finishing my sentences for me in a way that felt like impatience dressed up as affection. How she'd suggested, gently at first and then not so gently, that maybe I didn't need such a big house anymore. That maybe it made more sense for me to move somewhere smaller, easier to manage. Somewhere I didn't have to worry about the maintenance. She'd said it like she was doing me a favor. There's something else, my son said. I ran a search on the property records for your address. 3 weeks ago, someone submitted paperwork to the Provincial Land Registry flagging your property for a capacity review. What does that mean? It means someone is trying to build a legal case that you're not mentally fit to manage your own affairs. If they succeed, they can apply to become your financial guardian. They'd control your accounts, your pension, your house, everything. I'm 68 years old. I spent 34 years as a paramedic with Halton Region. I've seen people in the worst moments of their lives. I've kept my hands steady during things that would make most people look away. But sitting on that bed in the dark, I felt something shift under me that I hadn't felt since the morning I got the call about my wife. The paperwork, I said carefully. Whose name was on it? My son was quiet for a moment. Here's Dad. Her name was on it. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling and went back through the last 2 years, the way you go back through an accident scene, looking for the thing you missed the first time. My son-in-law had moved them both into my house 18 months ago. It started, as these things do, with a reasonable story. They were between places. The condo they'd been renting had sold. The new house they'd bought wasn't ready. Just 2 months, he'd said. 3 at most. He'd shaken my hand and looked me in the eye and said he'd never forget the kindness. That was 18 months ago. Within a few weeks, he'd set up a home office in my basement. Then came the cameras. Security cameras, he said. The neighborhood had seen some break-ins. He'd show me the news articles. He wanted to keep us all safe. I hadn't loved the idea, but he installed them before I properly decided, and after that it seemed petty to make an issue of it. I didn't understand then what the cameras were really for. I understand now. They weren't watching the street. They were watching me. Every visitor, every phone call made near the kitchen window, every time my doctor came over for a casual visit, every conversation I had at the front door. He was building a file, looking for anything that could be used to suggest I was confused, isolated, declining. My daughter had started accompanying me to medical appointments without being asked. She'd sit in the chair beside me and answer questions the doctor directed at me. The doctor would look at me and she would speak. I thought at the time she was just being caring. I thought I was lucky to have her. About 3 months after they moved in, I'd started having trouble finding things. Small things. My reading glasses, the remote control, a book I'd set down the night before. I mentioned it to my doctor and he said it was normal, that stress did that to people, that I shouldn't worry. But my daughter had been there for that appointment. She'd nodded with an expression I couldn't quite read. I wonder now whether things were being moved. I wonder how long that had been going on before I noticed. The next morning, I called my daughter's older brother back and told him I understood. He told me to act normal. Don't change anything. Don't confront her. Don't say a word to him. He was coordinating with the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit, and it would take another few weeks to be ready. Could I do that? I said I could. Those weeks were the longest of my life. I sat across from my son-in-law at my own kitchen table and ate meals and passed the salt and listened to him talk about the news and said nothing. He was charming, the way certain people are charming, which is to say he was performing it rather than feeling it. I could see that now. I didn't know how I'd missed it for so long. My daughter seemed nervous. She was quieter than usual. She'd started spending a lot of time on her phone, stepping out of the room to take calls. Once I walked past the back porch and heard her say, in a low, urgent voice, "We need to do it soon. He's not going to stay confused forever." I kept walking. I went down to the garage and I stood among my tools and I breathed. I'm a man who worked with his hands for 34 years. I have a workbench down there that my father built, the same one I'd learned to fix things on as a boy. I'd always found it calming to take something broken and make it work again. That night I picked up a radio I'd been meaning to repair for months. I replaced the capacitor. I adjusted the dial mechanism. When I turned it on, a CBC program came through clean and clear, and I stood there listening to it in the quiet of the garage and thought about all the things I couldn't fix. My son called 6 days later. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "Stay in the house until 9. After 9 you can go." I went for a long walk. I walked down by the lake, the way I used to walk with my wife on Sunday mornings when the kids were grown and the house was quiet. I was gone for 2 hours. When I came back, my son-in-law's car was no longer in the driveway. It never came back. The formal charges came the following week. Mortgage fraud, forgery, fraud over $5,000, a related charge under the Proceeds of Crime and Money Laundering Act. The RCMP had been building the case for over a year. 14 victims confirmed across Hamilton, Brampton, and Kelowna. Losses totaling over $3 million, with investigation ongoing. My daughter was not charged. There was no evidence. My son told me carefully that she had direct knowledge of the fraudulent transactions. The guardianship application she'd signed was being handled as a civil matter. Her lawyer was describing it as a misunderstanding. A form she'd signed without fully reading. I didn't say anything when he told me that. I thought about the voice on the back porch. He's not going to stay confused forever. A week after the arrest, she came to the door. She looked like she hadn't slept. Her hair, which she'd always kept carefully, was pulled back in a way that looked more like surrender than a style choice. She was wearing a coat I didn't recognize, borrowed or thrifted, and she stood on my front step in it and looked at me like I was a stranger she was hoping might still remember her. "Dad," she said, "can I come in?" I thought about it. I genuinely thought about it, standing there in my doorway with my hand on the frame. Part of me wanted to close the door and be done with it. But I'd known this woman since the moment she came into the world. I'd held her in the hospital in Burlington on a November morning and thought I had never seen anything so astonishing. Whatever she'd done, I needed to hear her account of it in her own words. I stepped aside. We sat in the kitchen. I didn't make coffee. She sat across the table from me with her hands around nothing, and she didn't know where to start, which told me she hadn't planned what to say, which was either honest or a different kind of performance. "I didn't know about the other families," she said finally. "I want you to know that. I didn't know what he was doing at work. But you know about me." She flinched. "He said it was for your protection, that you were getting to a point where you needed someone to manage things for you. I wanted to believe that. I think I worked hard to believe it. You were there when I couldn't find my glasses. You were there every time something small went wrong. She looked down at the table. Were things being moved? I asked. A long pause. I didn't do it, she said quietly. But I knew he was, and I didn't stop it. That might have been the most honest thing she'd said since she moved into my house. I sat with it for a moment, let it take up the space it deserved. You signed the legal document, I said, saying I wasn't capable of making my own decisions. I know. I spent 34 years running toward emergencies. I delivered 3 babies in the back of an ambulance. I kept people alive with my hands while their families fell apart around me. And you signed a piece of paper saying I couldn't be trusted to manage my own bank account. Her eyes filled. I know what I did. I don't have a version of this that makes it okay. What do you want from me? She shook her head. Nothing. I don't deserve anything. I just needed to tell you that I know what I did, that I understand, and that I'm sorry. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a neighbor's dog was barking at something down the street. Normal life going on as usual, indifferent to the damage being accounted for at my table. Here's what I need from you, I said. Not for me, for you. Get your own place. Get a job. Pay your own way. If you owe me legally, you pay it back without being chased for it. You figure out who you are when he's not telling you who to be. And then, after some years have passed, maybe we can talk. But not today. Not for a long time. She nodded. She stood up. At the door, she turned back, the way I suppose people always turn back because there's always something left that doesn't fit into the conversation. I love you, Dad. I know you do, I said. I love you too. That's not the part that broke. She left. I stood at the kitchen window and watched her get into a car I didn't recognize and drive away, and I let myself feel the full weight of it, all at once, without trying to manage it. Grief is like that. You can hold it at arm's length for a long time, but eventually it insists. Then I went down to the garage. The civil proceedings moved through the fall. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Hazel, who had been recommended by a colleague at the Paramedics Association, had filed a claim for financial exploitation and damages related to the fraudulent guardianship application. The total amount was $95,000, which covered the months of manipulation, the documented financial harm from accounts my son-in-law had accessed with the power of attorney my daughter had arranged without my knowledge, and the cost of the security review of my own home. Hazel was not interested in settling. When his public defender reached out to discuss terms, she told them plainly that they had used every tool available to them and that there would be no courtesy extended in return. I appreciated her style. My son-in-law's preliminary hearing was in October. It retained private counsel by then, which his lawyer presumably planned to bill against assets that were now frozen. The Crown prosecutor laid out the scope of it. 17 confirmed victims, over $4 million, forged assessments, manufactured identities, families who'd lost properties they'd owned for decades, people who trusted a process and been quietly destroyed by it. He sat at the defense table looking smaller than I remembered him. Smaller and less certain. The performance required an audience that believed in it, and the courtroom was not that audience. My daughter sat in the back row. I saw her when I arrived and I nodded once and I sat down at the front. We did not speak. The full trial was set for the following spring. Meanwhile, the civil suit moved forward on its own track. My son came for dinner one evening in November. He brought his kids, my 2 grandchildren, who are 9 and 12 and have strong opinions about everything, which I find delightful. We ate roast chicken at my kitchen table and the kids argued about whether a hot dog was a sandwich, which is apparently a genuine philosophical controversy among people their age. And for a couple of hours, the house sounded the way a house is supposed to sound. After dinner, after the kids had fallen asleep in front of a movie, my son and I sat on the back deck with our coffee, even though it was cold enough that our breath showed in the porch light. "You're doing all right?" he asked. "Better than I expected, harder than I hoped." He nodded. He has his mother's way of sitting with silence without feeling the need to fill it. "She called me," he said after a while. "Your daughter. She wanted to know if I thought you'd ever forgive her." "What did you tell her?" "I told her that wasn't the right question, that the question was whether she'd give you a reason to." I looked out at the yard. There's a garden my wife planted back in 2003 that I've been keeping up ever since. Every spring I put in the same things she always put in: tomatoes along the south fence, herbs near the back door, one row of sunflowers that served no practical purpose and were always just because she liked them. "She has some things to prove to herself," I said, "before any of it matters with me." In December, I listed the house. It wasn't a decision I'd agonized over. The house had been many things, good things, but the last 2 years had put a weight on every room in it that I didn't think time was going to lift. I wanted a fresh start, something smaller, something mine, in a way the house no longer felt mine. I found a 2-bedroom townhouse in Burlington, close to the lake, 10 minutes from my son's family. Good bones, good light. A small garage where I set up my workbench along the south wall, exactly the way it had been in the old house. Same tools, same shelf arrangement, same radio. The buyers of my house were a couple from Mississauga, with a young daughter and a dog that could barely contain its excitement about the yard. They closed in January and shook my hand at the lawyer's office with the kind of enthusiasm that makes you glad the place is going somewhere good. The civil hearing was in February. The courtroom was quiet. My daughter's lawyer had entered a consent to judgment the week before, which meant she didn't contest the claim. She'd called Hazel's office and said she wanted to stop fighting it. Hazel told me, and I sat with that for a day before I understood what I felt about it. At the hearing, the judge entered judgment in my favor. $95,000, payable in monthly installments over a period determined by her current income. Her lawyer confirmed her employment, a position at a property management company in Hamilton. She'd started 2 months prior. When it was over, Hazel and I walked out into the cold February air, and she said, quietly, that she'd handled a lot of these cases and that this one had gone about as well as they went. I thanked her. On the drive home, I stopped at a diner on the lakeshore and had a coffee and a piece of butter tart pie and sat looking out at the lake for a while. The water in February is a particular shade of gray that most people find bleak, but that I've always found honest. It doesn't pretend to be something it isn't. My son-in-law's trial concluded in April. He took a plea: fraud over $5,000, 2 counts of forgery under the criminal code, 1 count under the proceeds of crime legislation. The Crown had pushed hard. 11 years federal, eligible for parole after serving a third, which his lawyer noted was the minimum. The judge noted the scope of the harm, the number of victims, the premeditated nature of the scheme. She said she found it particularly troubling that family members had been drawn in and used as instruments of the fraud. My daughter, sitting in the back row, went very still when the judge said that. I went home to my townhouse after. My son had texted to ask how I was feeling, and I sat at my workbench for a few minutes before I answered. There was a clock on the bench. An old Sessions mantle clock that someone at the senior center had given me because they didn't have the patience for it. I'd been working on it for 2 weeks. The mainspring had been binding somewhere in the barrel, and I'd been patiently going through the mechanism piece by piece. I found the problem. A tiny burr on the edge of the arbor, barely visible, the kind of thing that only causes trouble because of where it sits. I smoothed it down with a small file, reassembled the barrel, wound the spring carefully, and watched the clock begin to run. I texted my son back. I said I was fine. I said I was glad it was over. I said, come for dinner this weekend. Bring the kids. I'll make the chicken again. 3 weeks after the sentencing, I found a card in my mailbox. No return address. My daughter's handwriting on the envelope. Inside was a plain card with nothing printed on it, just her handwriting. Paying this month's installment on time. Working. Seeing a therapist twice a week. I know this doesn't fix anything. I just wanted you to know I'm trying. I put the card on the shelf above my workbench, next to a photograph I keep there of my wife in the garden. The one taken the summer before she got sick. Sunflowers taller than her head and her laughing at something just out of frame. More cards came over the following months. Brief. Factual. No requests attached to them. Paid 2 months ahead. Therapist says the avoidance patterns go back further than I realized. Still working. Got a promotion. Assistant property manager. I know the irony isn't lost. I didn't write back. I wasn't ready. But I kept them. There's a small wooden box on the shelf beside the photograph now, and the cards go in there. My son asked me once, while we were sitting on my back patio in July, watching his kids chase fireflies around the yard, whether I thought I'd ever talk to her again. I thought about it the way I've learned to think about things that don't have quick answers. When she's earned her own respect back, I said. Not mine. Hers. When she can look at herself and see someone trustworthy, maybe then she'll have something real to bring to the conversation. He nodded. He understood what I meant. He's a careful thinker, that boy. My grandchildren came inside trailing grass and breathless with achievement, holding a mason jar with holes punched in the lid, one firefly circling the glass. Grandpa, the youngest said, holding the jar up to show me, we caught it, but we're going to let it go. Good, I said. That's the right instinct. Hold something long enough to know it's real. Then let it go. I spend my evenings now the way I've always liked best. Radio on, lamp lit, something broken on the workbench in front of me that just needs patience and the right attention to become whole again. The sessions clock keeps perfect time on the shelf. The cards accumulate in the box. The lake is a 10-minute walk and I go most mornings. Earlier in the summer, later when the weather turns. I'm 68 years old. I gave 34 years to keeping strangers alive. I survived the loss of my wife and the quieter loss of a daughter. I thought I knew, and a year of being slowly, carefully arranged into someone I wasn't. But I'm still here, in my own home, with my own tools, my name on the deed. The people who tried to rewrite that story are facing what stories like that eventually produce. Consequences have a clock of their own. They keep better time than most people think. I wound the sessions clock this morning before I left for my walk. Came back to it still running, steady. Each tick as clear as the first. Some things, once you fix them right, just keep going. There's a sessions clock on my workbench now that keeps better time than anything I've owned. I fixed it myself, the way I've fixed most things in my life. Slowly, without shortcuts, by understanding exactly what was broken before I touched anything. I think about that a lot when I think about what happened with my daughter. What she and her husband didn't come out of nowhere. Looking back, I can trace it the way you trace a crack in a wall back to where the foundation shifted. Small choices, made quietly, over a long time. The decision to look away when something felt wrong. The decision to let someone else do the thinking. The decision to want more than you'd earned and to tell yourself a story about why that was acceptable. None of it was sudden. It never is. And here's what I've come to understand about that. The consequences weren't sudden either. They were proportional. He built something dishonest over years and it collapsed over years, and it will cost him years to account for. She signed her name to something she should have questioned, and now she writes checks every month that remind her of it. There's a kind of arithmetic to how life settles these accounts. It isn't always fast, and it isn't always visible, but it doesn't forget. What kept me standing through all of it? And I've thought about this a great deal on my morning walks by the lake, was 3 things that I didn't fully appreciate until they were tested. The first was that I knew right from wrong, and I hadn't let go of that. I'd spent 34 years making decisions under pressure, in the back of an ambulance, in people's living rooms at 2 in the morning, when there was no time to consult anyone and no room for self-deception. That practice of being honest with yourself about what's actually happening in front of you, that's not a small thing. My son-in-law counted on me being too polite, too trusting, too comfortable to see clearly. He was wrong. Knowing what's right and refusing to pretend otherwise is the thing that started everything unraveling for him. The second was that I paid attention. I asked questions. When my son called that night, I listened and I thought and I acted carefully, not out of panic. My daughter's plan depended on me being manageable, on confusion being something I'd accept as my own declining mind, rather than something being done to me deliberately. The moment I started asking the real questions, whose name is on that paperwork? Why are those cameras actually pointed that way? The whole arrangement became unstable. Thinking clearly, even when people around you would prefer you didn't, is its own form of protection. The third was that I didn't quit. Not when it was humiliating to realize how long it had been going on. Not when it meant taking my own daughter to court. Not when winning felt like loss. I kept going to the lawyer's office and signing the documents and doing the next hard thing. That's all resilience ever really is. Not strength in some dramatic sense. Just continuing. Choosing to keep moving forward when stopping would have been easier. My daughter is somewhere in Hamilton right now, paying her installment, going to her appointments, doing the work of becoming someone she can look at honestly. I don't know yet whether there's a future where we sit across a table from each other without the weight of all this between us. Maybe there is, maybe in time. But I know that if it ever happens, it'll be because she found those same 3 things in herself. Because she decided what was right and held to it. Because she started thinking clearly instead of conveniently. Because she kept going even when it was hard. The clock on my shelf ticks whether I'm watching it or not. So does everything else that matters.